this is Kelly Phillips from the Art of Education, and we're just about to go inside and check out my TAB classroom. But before we do, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and also what teaching for artistic behavior is. So we're here in beautiful Hopkinton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, the home of TAB. TAB was invented in Massachusetts about 35 years ago in classrooms, so it's by art teachers for art teachers, and it's basically based on the premise that students are artists and we should really allow them to generate their own ideas, set up their own artwork, and really take care of their own studio space. I've been doing TAB for about 9 years, which is as long as I've been teaching. I was lucky enough to study at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, where a lot of TAB research is done and where my professors were TABers before they were professors. And I also did my student teaching in a TAB classroom. So I really learned how to set up and run a TAB classroom directly from the source. So let's go inside and check it out. Welcome to my TAB Drawing Center. The Drawing Center is the first center you open in a TAB classroom because it really teaches two big main ideas in the TAB philosophy. One is how do artists generate their own ideas, and the other is how do artists set up and clean up their own studio space. So on the first day of your Drawing Center demonstration, you're going to want to teach kids about what do artists draw. So you can see behind me there's a poster that says exactly that, and then below it, it says artists draw from memory, artists make marks, artists draw from imagination, they draw what they feel, and they draw what they observe. So these are different ways to look at where artists find ideas. And you're going to want to introduce this to your students and then discuss it with them. And this is a thread that's going to last throughout the whole year in different centers. The second part is you're going to want to show students exactly how to find materials in your particular drawing center. And the reason you introduce the drawing center first in this is because drawing materials are the easiest to teach kids how to set up and clean up. And then you can move on to things a little harder like paint or clay. So in my drawing center, I have tubs of materials that are labeled, and students can take them out and bring them to their tables. And in maybe a high school or middle school classroom, you might have boxes of materials in closets and things like that that students can have access to. It's just important that students know exactly where the materials are so that they can choose the materials that's right for what they're doing right now. The next thing you're going to want to talk about is paper. So in my TAB classroom, I have 11 by 17 paper, I have smaller 9.5 by 11 paper, and then I have specialty papers like colored paper or graph paper or comic book strip paper that students can use. In an older classroom, you might want to talk to students about what types of paper work best with which media. And then you're going to also want to provide limits on paper. The reason that I provide limits is because I buy really high quality paper for my students. So I'll buy heavier paper and then limit students to one piece of paper both sides per class. And if they're working on a larger 11 by 17 paper, they have to use it for at least 2 weeks before they can choose another new piece of paper. And the benefit of TAB is you can buy really high quality materials because less students are working in a center at one time. The next part you're going to want to introduce in your drawing center is the reference material area. So you're going to want to have things like drawing books. I like to ask my librarian for library discards so that students can look through a variety of photographs on different subjects. I have technology in my classroom where students can look up different videos on how to draw things or different areas of interests, and you can flip your classroom by making videos about different techniques that you want to teach them. I usually have mirrors in my classroom and anchor charts about how to draw people. And you're going to want to have some observational drawing objects so that students can set up their own still lives. And you can even teach students, have a particular lesson on one day about how to set up a still life and how to draw from observation. After drawing, students now know how to generate their own ideas and set up their own studio space. So I introduced my next two centers, technology and collage, pretty quickly after that. Technology is not only used to research and generate ideas, but it's also used to document student work. So I actually have an anchor chart of how students can upload to Artsonia really easily, and I teach them this skill so that they can do it completely independently, so that when they're done with the project, the idea is that before they take home anything, it gets uploaded and documented with an artist statement. And this really prevents kids from taking too many pieces of artwork home before showing you them. And it also is just a great way to, let parents and administrators know what kids are working on in your room. After that, collage is the next one that opens. And so in my collage center, there is a setting up of how to make a collage. And so the first thing you do is choose a base. And then I really am pretty stringent about the fact that you cannot cut a base. Bases are for gluing things onto. And that really prevents students from cutting a teeny tiny square out of the middle of a piece of paper. And then I have drawers of colored paper that are small enough for students to cut out of. I have stickers, photographs. I like to get discarded book pages from the library and magazines. And then I also have a small tabletop origami center in my collage area. It's a very popular center despite being so small, and it has different sizes of origami paper, a bunch of different origami books that students can look through. And I basically tell them that it's the same as when you're choosing a book for reading. You want to choose a book that's your level. So if you start using an origami book that's not working for you, go back and choose one that's a little bit more at your level so you can work your way up to the harder book. After collage comes painting, and painting is by far one of the hardest centers to clean up and to keep from getting messy. So you're going to want to place it really close to your sink. And then you're going to want to think about how do you want students to work. So you can have easels set up, you can have tables set up so that students can have a space that they can get started working. And then to start out my painting center, I usually provide students with pan watercolors and cake tempera because those are easier materials to manage at the beginning. And then as they show me that they can have more responsibility, I start to provide liquid watercolors and liquid tempera. I use ice cube trays, and then I put them inside of a Tupperware with a sealable top. So you can see it has like a little clasp. And then I just keep them out and I mix them up at the end of the day so that I don't waste paint. And then if students need newer colors, they can ask me to refill or to give them a newer color. The other great thing about the painting center is that you don't have to provide them with a million low-quality brushes. I provide about 10 to 20 really high-quality brushes that students can use so that they can have the right tool for the job, and they don't have to be fishing through a lot of really dirty, broken brushes. And the benefit of that is, at the end of the day, you don't have to clean up 400 brushes in the sink. My students actually wash them and put them out for the next class. Younger students, you might need to have like a receptacle for them to put brushes in so you can wash. And then I also use cardboard for palettes. The great thing about using cardboard is it's disposable, but if you have a sculpture center, then you can actually save the painted pieces of cardboard and put them in the sculpture center for students to use as part of their found object sculptures. Okay, so here we are at by far the most popular center in a TAB classroom, the Found Object Sculpture Center. It can be really hard to manage, but I'm going to teach you a few tricks that I have for keeping my sculpture center well maintained. One thing is that I always make students do what's called the attachment challenge before they start working in the sculpture center. So I teach them ways to attach. And then it's a challenge they have to complete before they can move on and make anything in the sculpture center. The other big part of being in the sculpture center is the transformation and upside down shake test. So the transformation test, I provide them with a little worksheet they have to fill out, and it basically says you have to ask 3 peers what they see first, and if it's the building material such as a cardboard or a tube, that's grounds for redesign. And that keeps them from throwing a bunch of stuff together, putting it on the take-home table, and taking it home right away without fully transforming it. And that, I'm really, really strict on that thing because it gets students really thinking about what's the difference between stuff glued together and artwork. And then the upside-down shake test makes sure that students don't take home work that is falling apart. So before they take home a piece of artwork, they need to turn it upside down, shake it vigorously, and make sure nothing falls off. And if anything does, grounds for redesign. And then the last test that they need to complete in the Sculpture Center is the sizeometer. So the sizeometer is basically just shows you, it's a WB Mason box, and if a sculpture is bigger than this, it cannot go home without a parent coming to pick it up. And that prevents kids from making giant sculptures that you can't store. I put all of my sculpture materials that students can use in a big box so that I don't have to constantly be sorting tubes and cardboard pieces and knickknacks into different boxes. I do use hot glue guns in my classroom and provide students with gardening gloves that are plasticized so that they can use hot glue guns. And I've used hot glue guns with students as young as first grade. And then the cool stuff boxes are just different knickknacks and things like that that are organized into different bins so that kids can go through and find beads and brass fasteners and buttons and things to glue onto their sculpture to make their sculpture look cool. Here I am in the Ceramic Center, and the Ceramic Center is probably one of the most difficult centers to have running constantly in a TAB classroom, so I tend to have it open much later in the year. I make sure that everything is set up so that students have access to it really immediately. I make sure that all of the routines we have in the Clay Center are posted on the wall. So for instance, how to slip and score and what happens when you don't, how to make a pinch pot, how to make a coil, how to set up your space, and how to clean up your space. I pre-roll little clay balls about depending on the size of your student's hands, you can work smaller, and put them in a plastic bag and then put that plastic bag inside of a labeled Tupperware container with a sealable top. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is allow students to learn how to glaze, but they don't necessarily have to glaze every project. So you may want to tell students that they can glaze one piece of non-functional ware a year, but then only things that they're going to use to eat and drink out of should be glazed from that time on. And then teach them other ways to finish clay. So for instance, watercolor, tempera paint, markers. You can teach them how to use like a Mod Podge to glaze the outside after finishing these projects. But it basically just lowers the amount of time that you need to be firing work. When I'm setting up the Clay Center for my students, I make sure to provide them with small canvas mats that they can work on so the clay doesn't stick to the table. And I really teach them about the dangers of clay dust. So I make sure to show them exactly how to dump their clay mat into the trash can before putting it away without shaking it, and to never, ever sweep in the Clay Center. But this is also a really cool center to watch students grow in, because if you teach them one small skill, they can sort of, learn to make larger and larger things as the year goes on. So I really love the Ceramic Center, and I think it's definitely worth having. So the main centers, drawing, collage, painting, found object sculpture, and ceramics are really important to have open first. And then you can start to play around with ephemeral centers. So things like screen printing, working with weaving. You can have a fiber arts center. You can have a printmaking center. You can have a glass fusing center. So you can really play around with having centers that last shorter amounts of time, maybe 1 month, maybe 2, maybe a week, to just show kids different types of materials, especially if you're working with younger students. And if you work with older students, you may want to have boot camps or skills workshops where you show them particular things that you want them to try at least once. So how to draw in perspective, how to use certain materials to create value. So you want to have these workshops and things going on throughout the year. The great thing about TAB, though, is that you can show students maybe about 5 minutes of what that particular project is, and you can ask students who are really interested to stay and continue and allow other students to get working on other projects. Or you can show them a skill and you can let them work at their own pace on what's called a have-to project so that they can try out a certain thing before moving on to a new project. One of the biggest worries that people have is, how do you get finished work, how do you get quality work, and how do you get work for art shows when you're working in TAB? And if you're working with older students, especially 4th grade or up, you really want to move away from play, which you do at the beginning of the year, towards creating a finished piece with a deadline. And that's where WOW projects come in. WOW projects stand for Wonderful Original Work of Art, and they were invented in a TAB classroom. And basically, it gets students working on a long-term project cycle. So for WOW projects in my classroom, I like to provide a certain amount of criteria. And it usually has something to do with the craftsmanship of the work, the amount of time that it took, whether or not that student received feedback from their peers. Critiquing could happen in a high school classroom, and whether or not that artwork was documented. So this is an example of a WOW project poster that you could create that just talks about what you're expecting for a certain project. And you can see some of the WOW projects that were created behind me. The great thing about a WOW project is that students can create them in any type of media. So you can have a sculpture, you can have students who are really interested in drawing, who can make series, you can have students working in the painting center to create a WOW project, and it doesn't have to be in any particular media, but it's all about time spent, quality of work, and asking others for feedback. My students really love TAB because it gives them autonomy over their process. And I think that's really important to them when they're learning how to be an artist. People who switch to TAB tend to find that kids are a little bit less apathetic, a little bit more engaged, and a little bit less likely to just not really enjoy art as a subject. And then parents and administrators tend to like TAB once they see that their students are really engaged in the TAB process. So it's important for you to invite people into your classroom. If you're brave enough, have some parent volunteers, ask your administrator to come and see you. And then have a social media presence, have a website, and really just put out how TAB's working for you and some of the things that students are doing in your classroom. It's important to show those process-based things that are happening because I think they're really exciting and they elicit a lot of support for you. So even if you can't get everybody on board with TAB, it's good to just arm yourself with a lot of information and put it out there so that people can't really deny the research behind the learner-directed classroom. And then lastly, get yourself involved in the online community. It's important to have support, and there's support and strength in numbers. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you just need to know like how to set up a fiber center, reach out and ask somebody from the TAB community. They're really close-knit and they're all over the world, and everybody does things a little bit differently. So people are totally willing to share what's going on in their classroom. Thank you so much for taking the time to explore my TAB classroom. Hopefully you're leaving with some tips and tricks and ways to get started. I've attached a few resources and different guides and a few articles that I've written on theartofed.com that just basically explain what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And good luck with the rest of your choice-based art education class. Bye.